Hi, welcome to Chapter 5. I think one of the real tools we have besides the actual tone or enunciation of our words, our accents, if we, good or bad, in my case, is the space between the words. It gives us a chance to more or less rewrite what we have. And I think it's one of the biggest tools we have in expressing and finding emotion. This next scene kind of leans that direction. It's a little more introspective. And we have so much action coming that I have to have a few moments. And, the microphone, as I discover, and I'm sure you will too, is, it hears the space. It hears the hurry. It hears when we try to speak fast. But it also hears the intent and the pause and the space between the words. And so, if you're the author as well, you know the words, you wrote them. You'll discover new things about them. But narrating gives us one more chance to refine and deliver the story that we were trying to tell. So anyway, Chapter 5, raw and unengineered and with my stumbles and screw-ups and a few gasping for breath here and there as I mistime things. But these are the raw, unedited versions of the story. Chapter 5. He sat alone on the rocks. He'd passed a sparse row of men casting their lines to feed their bellies and provide for their families, past others whose reels cost more than most made in a month of hard labor. The only people who had made it out this far, the very tip of the jetty, were a couple of young lovers deep in physical conversation. They left soon, after it became obvious he was here to stay. Ships and tankers, cruise ships and freight barges lumbered back and forth, while the Coast Guard and harbor patrol skipped across their wakes in a choreographed ballet of dodging giants. Behind the endless stacks of 20 and 40-foot steel container cars, the towering gantry cranes sat like a row of hungry insects, perched against the fading skies. The sun had been high overhead when he'd arrived, his shadow lost in the abrupt angles of boulders and the rocks of the promontory. But now his inky shadows stretched out into the water, lapping below his feet. He was down to just minutes of either leaving to see the girl as promised, or to fulfill her expectations and find a reason not to show. No longer a girl, of course, and she'd married, probably have children of her own. But still, there were things to say, kindnesses remembered, thoughts and impressions imprinted on his very being. Was she happy? And what could he do if she wasn't? 9 years. How many lifetimes had come between them in that time? Just shy of his 28th birthday, Nash had no friends to keep in touch with, besides the teammates who counted on him to help win games, or the cheerleaders who had invited him to be a part of their educations. He'd had just 3 real friends in high school. One, now a professor somewhere in Canada, teaching American history or economics or some such. Another who had volunteered and chosen the burgeoning nuclear submarine program. He could only imagine he must have done well. And a third who had been killed that first month they'd arrived together on the south central shores of Vietnam, amidst the exotic colors and smells and sounds of another world. Life in the service was compressed. He'd quickly made friends and a few enemies, though he couldn't imagine they'd remember his name if it was spoken to them now. Many from both camps came home in pieces, if at all, either mentally or physically or both. How do you explain that? All the beauty and the horror to someone beautiful and sweet and kind, who elegantly argued that Winnie the Pooh was one of the greatest books ever written. He hadn't moved in hours. No great feat of concentration or meditation. He simply didn't have the will. He didn't feel bad about breaking the boy's arm or leaving the other with a limp he'd carry for the rest of his life. He felt bad about a world that needed such things done. A sound made him turn. His body petrified from recent inaction. His bones creaked, and 100 old injuries fought to keep him in place. A small fish, caught in the smallest of natural basins, splashed against the rocks. He watched it struggle. He could leave it, let it fend for itself. It would soon be food for one of the terns or seagulls that splattered the rocks with their waste. Why should one life be more important than another? And who the hell was he to decide? He watched the creature flop and splash, was flooded with parallels to his own struggles, tried to put words to what? He was close to something that made sense of it all. If only he could. A ship's horn blared. The sound shattered his thoughts against the rocks, crushing whatever hope he'd had of putting it into words. He knelt and scooped up the glistening creature, the scales iridescent in the waning light. He reveled in its energy, shared in the life force that bound them. He'd learned a lot of things in the bamboo prison, things which no man should know. Others he'd wrestle with 50 years later. The fish thrashed in his hands, little more than a minnow, but with a will that touched him. He tossed it back into the water and imagined he saw it swim away. Go or stay. He stood long moments as it played out in his mind. She'd be convinced he wouldn't show, would know she'd made the right choices all along. Fuck. Why disappoint her now? Nash felt for the near-empty bottle in his pocket, let the last drops run down his throat. Okay, a few obvious stumbles, but these are about raw reads and kind of sharing the process. The delivered audiobook will be edited and tightened and engineered and hopefully made better. But in the meantime, I'm learning and happy to share that with you. The plot thickens, as they say, in chapter 6 and 7. And there's 100 short chapters, so we've done 5 in a prologue. So welcome to Kelly Reads, and hopefully these are fun and entertaining and maybe a little bit inspiring. And I look forward to any comments or interaction. You can reach out and trash or compliment or pat me on the back. It all keeps me going. So welcome. Thanks. Bye.